Hello and welcome to WorldCanvass from International Programs at the University of Iowa. I'm Joan Kerr, and we're coming to you from the Senate Chamber of the Old Capitol Museum here on the campus of the University of Iowa. In this four-part series about film, the last 100 years of film, we are discussing everything from the evolution of film, the development of film, through various genres, and talking with some film faculty here at the University of Iowa. And in our next segment, we'll be speaking with a filmmaker whose film was shown here on campus last night. Documentary film shot in China. So trying to cover a lot of ground and understand a little bit about the filmmaking process. In this segment of the program, we have two guests who are graduate students working on their MFAs here at the University of Iowa. And just next to me is Remington Smith. Happy to have you here, Remington. Thanks. You're welcome. And next to him is Kreitzer. Hi, Jesse.
Hi, Joe.
So good to have you here. I'm going to investigate your own work in films. I'd like to talk about a couple of the films you've given me links to so that I have a little bit better idea of what you do, but I did want to sort of start out with asking you how you came to film. Why is film the thing you decided you wanted to get a graduate degree in? And I'll just start with you, Remington.
Yeah, I actually took a very kind of roundabout way to getting to film. I was actually working on a bachelor's in history, and I thought I was going to be a high school history teacher at the University of Louisville. And I was taking a lot of photos at the time, and after taking photos of like some zombie fight in my dorm room, it seemed like a natural progression that I would ask some friends to borrow a camera and start making movies. So movie making was always something, it was just another thing to do to get people together. I was always the one trying to get people together to do something crazy or random. And so filmmaking was just a communal activity. It was something Remington's gonna come up with an idea. We'll go and check out an abandoned house, or now we're gonna go make a movie. So it's a natural progression, and so it took several baby steps for me to finally come to the MFA program, where I started to become interested in film studies potentially, because also at the University of Louisville I was the film chair, and we were helping program films at the campus theater, and so that was really nurturing a place that I didn't think I could go to because of worried about economic security, someone might say. And while I was at the University of Edinburgh, I was able to shoot a documentary as part of a documentary film production class, and that's when, I mean, no offense to the film studies professors, I was like, I'm done, I need to do film production. And so I applied to the MFA in film production. Actually, it was my third time applying to the University of Iowa, and I was glad that I didn't get into the PhD program, and instead I had changed my mind on what I do with the MFA. So.
Yeah. Wonderful, great. And so for people watching the show who might not know the difference between the film studies program and a film production area,
So film studies, I can't give like the best definition, but interacting analysis of cinema and thinking about theory and these types of things. And I enjoyed that work, but at the same time, it was the direct engagement that film production could have, the ability to potentially reach a wider audience that might be a little bit more accessible. So again, that like sense of community, I felt like film production and making films that would reach a film audience would kind of facilitate that one for myself personally.
Yeah. And what's your story, Jesse?
My story? It's a long one, Joe. No. Let's see. Well, I've always felt this sort of inherent bond to filmmaking, and that I actually have more of an ancestral tie. My grandfather, Abraham Kreitzer, was a photographer for his lifetime. He was just always an enthusiast, and he always had a camera on his hip. And then my uncle on my maternal side had also taught film production for most of his career. So I've always been pursuing the cinematic arts. I was also raised in rural Vermont. My parents really chose to raise us there in large part because of Marlboro Elementary. I always sort of attribute my tenacity for film to the school, in large part because they always tended to the students' interests. It wasn't that I knew early on that I had an interest in storytelling and cinema, and would always shout out names of actors and films, and I was always very attuned to, especially independent film. I recognized early on a clear distinction between, say, Hollywood cinema and independent cinema. and I wasn't always able to vocalize what that was, at least when I was younger. But I was always drawn to films that sort of operated from the margins. And so at the very least, Marlboro Elementary, from 3rd grade, they put a camera in my hands. And yeah, so I was making video reports, video essays on the Fisher cat or the operations of the cerebral cortex, you name it. But at a young age, I was always using film as a way to tell stories and to educate.
Yeah. Well, and you guys are of an age where it's really so wonderful that you had this interest in film as youngsters, because the film equipment is so much smaller now, less bulky, more maneuverable, I imagine, than some of those very, very early cameras 60, 70 years ago, which would be, I guess, huge and much more difficult. So, so you came along at the right time to get started on that stuff early.
Sure.
No.
Well, except for the fact that I'm still an enthusiast for celluloid, and actually just produced a film. It was a period film set in 1941. Based on the story of Alan Lomax, who was a folklorist from the Library of Congress, as was his father. And in 1941, he was traveling with this acetate field recorder. The equipment weighed upwards to 500 pounds. And at least my process to recreate this story, I wouldn't have done it digitally on a little camera. So I chose to use the antiquated equipment to produce the film. Yes, it's very heavy, but the aesthetic, it cannot be duplicated. I'm a bit of a purist, I suppose, and that aesthetic could really only be captured on film, or maybe very expensive, high-end digital equipment, but there was something much more romantic about producing it on film.
So you shared that link with me, and I had a chance to see this beautiful film, Lomax, and I loved it. It was wonderful. The audio, everything was beautiful. But what is the aesthetic that you get with celluloid that you can't get or you don't get with those digital?
Sure. Well, I shot black and white, 16 millimeter celluloid, and it's a period film. There's just something. Yeah, it's very easy to say it's organic. There's an organic quality. There's something. There's texture, and also I just seem to have some more of a bond. I react. There's more of this emotional resonance when I watch something on celluloid, whereas there's something so clean and precise about HD video that there's almost the spirit is gone. And that said, I could also look at a digital film or something shot with video. Maybe I can't tell the difference anymore, but at least for my own work, I find that there's some subject matter that it's dictated by the content, what format if you're shooting film or video. But certainly in the case of Lomax, it would have been a real disservice, especially the way that he went about recording in the field, to really honor him and use the equipment that he would have been using there.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's great to have that option though, either or, because if it was still like 1960, I probably wouldn't be making movies because I just didn't have the resources. So I literally posted something on Facebook, hey, can I borrow someone's camera? And then rented a shotgun microphone because I knew I at least wanted to get good audio on my first film. And that was how I got started. So I think even though it's difficult to find an audience and somebody who's going to distribute your film, even though there are these tools that make filmmaking easier, I think it's still, it's for the better for sure that we have these things available, and it's nice to know that there are more and more digital cameras that can achieve some of the aesthetic of film in terms of the latitude, because again, I was taking a lot of celluloid pictures before I got into film production, and I can sympathize with that. There is definitely a difference between film and digital, and how to achieve the same type of depth and kind of, again, organic feeling to it.
And people are very, very tied to certain things that they, the two Steves in our first segment were talking about sort of expectations that can be created for filmgoers, and how you watch and how you listen and so on. And to date myself a little bit, I worked for years and years as a classical music producer on a radio station, which just meant that I was a classical music DJ. And when CDs came along, and we stopped playing LPs, so this goes back a long time now, but many people in our audience reacted very negatively to the super clean sound of a CD. They thought it all sounded too fake, too sort of not real, and they missed that tangible something that was on an LP.
I mean, I was a 35 millimeter projectionist and also did IMAX celluloid projectionist, and so when the real strong wave of digital projectors came along, part of me died a little bit. So I can sympathize with that even if I haven't shot on site.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about your film that you shot in Edinburgh, which you shared with me? It was called The Last Good Thing, or
it's called Last Good Thing.
Last Good Thing. Tell us about that film.
Yeah, so minor spoiler alert because I kind of keep it vague, but it was a short documentary that I produced. The class was broken up into 2 semesters. The first semester was kind of film theory and analysis on documentary filmmaking and the ethics of documentary filmmaking. And then the second semester was trying to put those lessons to use in practical terms. And so it's a short film about a grave digger in Edinburgh and what his work is like and how that intersects with his personal life. And to go back and watch that film before I had any sort of like professional tech training, a lot of my stuff is just self-taught. But when I go back and rewatch it, I think it still works because I had spent so much time with him before shooting and got to get him comfortable with me as much as myself comfortable with him. And after this interview that's in the film, I think we talked for an hour about what it was like for him to have somebody come and look at his job and want to know what it's like for him to work in this profession, to look past just like some sort of ghoulish notion. And so I think that speaks to the power of filmmaking, whether it's fiction, which I also do, or documentary, which is this power that we have to represent people, to tell stories that we aren't often allowed to hear or know about, and to be careful about that power, both for fiction, because I know there was talk about propaganda in a previous piece in terms of maybe certain documentaries and such, but fiction films, like when I watched the first Transformers movie, that's a jingoistic film at the end of the day because it's talking about the inherent goodness of Americans at the end almost. And like people don't think about these types of politics that are going on in their fiction art, but it's something that makers need to be aware of. And so my time at the University of Edinburgh was really important in terms of cultivating that ethical sensibility and trying to seek out narratives for people that aren't usually represented. So a lot of times for documentary subjects, it's trying to pick up stories that we aren't interacting with. And then for fiction projects, it's can we have somebody other than a white male character lead the story? So.
Yeah, so what drives your thinking when you're I don't know if you ever have to look for a project or if you've got a book full of, a whole notebook full of potential projects that you'd like to do one day, but what is it that sort of trips your imagination?
Oh, wow. A lot of things. You never really have a shortage of ideas. I always find it's always about timing. Like, I had been wanting to tell the story of Alan Lomax for many years, but it wasn't the right time. So granted, graduate school gives you the time to focus on your own work rather than having to balance, a salaried day job with independent film practice.
Yeah.
And also the reason why I'm here in Iowa is it's an opportunity to explore my ancestral ties to this state. On my maternal side, my grandmother was from Albia, Iowa. My great-grandfather was the state mining inspector for Iowa. And there are a lot of stories here in this state, and so right now the time is right for me to explore these stories. And so I plan to produce, it's actually another period film, fictional film loosely inspired by my family or their history in Iowa as coal miners. And right now I'm focusing on a work based around an image that was taken in 2009 of the spreading of my grandmother's ashes from Iowa. She had requested to go home, and my uncle, her son, had interpreted that as she wanted to go to Iowa. And so they went to the Historical Society in Des Moines. They had track down the coordinates of her home. It's Maple, Iowa, which is a ghost town now. When the coal mines dried up, so did the town. And so they spread her ashes. And the ceremony was documented on 35mm film, so there's something there that's worth exploring. And when they developed the film, there was this green milkish orb, an apparition of sorts, coming out of the urn. And it's undeniable. I mean, there's an energy in this photo, and it makes skeptics believers in some way. And so I'm very interested in using this as a story, or I should say, in some way of grounding, an exploration into my ancestral ties here in Iowa. So it kind of comes to you, and when it's the right time, and you move.
That's exciting. Wow.
Yeah.
But you are working on a piece, Beneath These Trees, which is actually shot near your hometown, isn't it? Louisville.
Yeah, so last semester I produced a short film called Beneath These Trees, which I've now expanded to become my thesis film. It has yet to be titled, but it's about a neighborhood in Louisville, Kentucky, where there's heavy industrial manufacturing right next to people's homes. And it's just the exploration of these spaces. You hear about Rubbertown in terms of higher rates of cancer that people live there, higher rates of respiratory illness, leukemia in children, and it's like one thing for you to hear about it on the news, but what I was interested in was to actually go to some of these locations and show people what it's like. And so in that process, what's been most interesting is no matter where I go, if I'm at a park that's right next to some sort of gas refinery, or if I'm on a Superfund site where there is toxic dumping in the middle of the woods, there's always someone there that I'm interacting with, like showing that these hazardous facilities are right next to people's homes. And I've been fortunate enough when I go into these spaces, these people are willing to speak to me. And kind of the thread that's carrying throughout is this one woman who lives near this neighborhood. She's moving her entire house to another county because it's cheaper for her to do that than to try and sell her home there. Because your home value, of course, is depreciated because of these facilities and whatnot. If you can sell it, even at like 50%. So everything's shot except for this moving the house segment. So that's what I'm waiting on. But I think it speaks to, again, trying to show people things that they like hear about, but in this first person mode, like, oh, this is what it looks like. Because as I've been doing this film, I realized like highways are a great way to keep people cut off from other communities. You don't even have to look at poverty. You don't have to look at how the other half lives. The way that city planners keep people separate in terms of, like in Louisville, like the east side is known as more affluent, and then the west side is predominantly like African American and known for poverty. And where I grew up in the south side was, I feel like that's where the real melting pot is poverty in the United States. Like that's where you're going to see the greatest diversity. But there were parts of Rubbertown that I hadn't even been to, and to force people to actually interact with these spaces. Like it's not just, oh, the west side. It's, no, I have something tangible that I can experience, even though I've never driven there. So it's been a very enriching experience, and in contrast to my fiction work, where with the documentary work, it's usually myself and a camera, and just wanting to interact with people. And then fiction projects, maybe a little bit more controlled, and working with a large group. And so I guess it offers different experiences.
I know both of you are involved in I don't recall the community projects, working with schools, and you are connected, are you not, with the Downtown Theater?
I'm the director of the Bijou Film Board.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And so that allows you to obviously enjoy films that others have made and book films that you think people ought to see. Is there any sort of primary theme in your mind when you're thinking about a film that you think you might want to book? Obviously, it would be of, I suppose, virtually any sort of genre. What is it that makes you want to see that film?
Yeah. Oh, well, I have I'm a big enthusiast for rural storytelling, and so usually any film shot in the countryside, I'm usually tune in. But I will say we're about to implement a bi-weekly campus programming series. And so basically tapping into the wealth of the university departments, faculty, student orgs, and finding films handpicked that we'd screen, but then also be able to host a discussion around the film and issues that might relate to life on campus.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great that you're interested in rural films because we very often hear about people who are really inspired by city stories. But what is it about the rural story that attracts you?
Simplicity.
Yeah.
Yeah, a way of life that maybe has been paved over by modernity, ancient customs and traditions. So there's something exciting there, and there's also a sort of mystical element in the country, perhaps because I was raised there, and maybe that longing, having lived over a decade in Boston, and now even, say, Iowa City, I would regard it's urban, and so I've always been very inspired by the natural landscape, and certainly feel most at peace there, and so my stories seem to reflect that.
Yeah. When did you graduate?
May 2015, a year and a half left, and I plan to produce the fictional coal mining film in September of this year.
Wonderful, great. So you shoot it in September, and then you
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes, and then we'll have that.
A year to work on it.
Right. That's right.
Great. And how about you? Did you graduate soon?
Graduated in May of 2014.
Wow. So what comes next after that?
So hopefully I'm able to document this main character, Monica, moving her house at some point, whether it's before graduation or stick with it after and then submit that to festivals. I'm also working on a Kentucky Derby documentary exploring some of the similar themes. I've shot some material already, but I lived just down the street from Churchill Downs for 3 years, and so it's the issues of poverty and race are very apparent around Churchill Downs, and I'm interested in exploring that space. And I just shot a fiction film a couple weeks ago that I'm editing right now as well. So there's a lot of stuff on there.
Yeah. Wow, really nice to see the next generation of filmmakers. I hope we'll be seeing a lot of your work in future years. So Jesse Kreitzer and Remington Smith, good to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Best of luck with everything.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so this is part 3 of this WorldCanvass series on the century of film in the public sphere, and our guests have been Jesse Kreitzer and Remington Smith. I'm Joan Kerr. Thank you for watching us. You can find all of this programming on the UI channel on YouTube, also on iTunes, UI TV, and the International Programs website, which is international.uiowa.edu. I'm Joan Kerr. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.